Final Fantasy 16. This is the game of the year that everyone's going to be raving about for years to come. But there have been some hot takes out there, and we're going to examine them with a little bit more detail and scrutiny to find out whether they have any real merit or whether they're complete and utter horseshit. We're going to be going through this in 3 different stages. We're going to be doing the story-oriented, which are the real basic bitch hot takes that we can take down with a click of our fingers. And then we're going to be going into the combat orientated hot takes. Now these are the guys that have a little bit of a point, but they completely miss the mark once you actually start delving deeper into what they are actually saying and what the game actually showcases. And then finally, we'll be moving into Final Fantasy mode, and we're going to be dealing with the harshest critics which have the most merit behind them, and we're going to see if we can challenge these hot takes and find out a true middle ground. So let's get into it, and let's have a look at Final Fantasy 16's hottest gaming takes. Our first gaming hot take is Andrea Piccini and the Twitter video that got posted by them probably about 2 weeks ago when the game first came out, of a person eating a sandwich and pressing one button and saying that the game combat is too easy because they pressed the same button 30 times. And the story is terrible, even though they are literally in the demo of the game. That's right, the demo of the game. The game isn't even out, and they're saying the story is terrible and the combat is super basic. But it turns out, if we just scroll down this Twitter feed, we can see this person is using multiple accessibility modes such as auto dodge, health regen, as well as being on the literal prologue and introduction of the game. So this is the easiest hot take to completely get out of the way. This game's combat actually has a lot of depth once you actually get into it and turn off all of the accessibility modes. That being said, these accessibility modes are really good for the game, even for professional gamers out there who play a lot of games and know how to play games well. It actually shows you some combos in the game that you wouldn't normally do. It has timing, so you can understand the better timings for dodges. For example, you're versing a flan, which is like a gelatinous creature, and you're not exactly sure when you should be dodging for each of these attacks. You put on the auto dodge mechanic, and you can see when the exact timing that you need to use your dodge button is. So you can remove the guesswork from these monsters instead of having to look up frame data going, okay, I should be dodging at this frame instead of this frame. You can just see the frame data by using these accessibility modes, and it's really helpful sources for improving your own gameplay. And then you turn the accessibility modes off, and you can just play the game better because you've experienced the game with auto dodge. This is very useful. Even the health regen is very useful. For example, you are going into, instead of going into the literal zone for practicing combos and stuff like that, which exists in the game, you can just go out in the field and actually fight bosses and learn mechanics from these bosses and have this backup health regen to help you during this boss fight to not make it so tedious while you're trying to learn the mechanics, learn the timings, and all the rest. It's really useful information and stuff. And this guy sort of boils it down to the most basic thing ever, saying, game is bad because I put on all of the cheats and made the game redundant. It's like playing an FPS game, putting on all of the auto aim, all of the wall hacks, all of the low ping compensation stuff so that your character is glitching across the screen for other players and going, oh, I'm so good at this game, everyone, no one can shoot me and I get headshots 100% of the time. This game is the best game ever. This game is the worst game ever. It's too easy, man. I'm getting everything. It's just you gotta really think about these things before you just straight up bombard yourself into it. It's really dumb. in a lot of ways. Next up, we have the famous, the legendary hot take that medieval Europe has a lack of diversity in Final Fantasy 16, and it's souring the, says, black players. This is from Eurogamer. Now, Eurogamer generally put out some decent content, but there are a few really bad reporters on their website, and they just do the shittest hot takes for views or whatever else. They just literally copy paste what Kotaku and Polygon are doing, and they just go, "We doing the same, we're good, right?" And now we're going to completely destroy the argument that it is not diverse, because they misunderstand what diversity actually is in the real world. Diversity isn't skin color. That's what a lot of people think when they say diversity, but it's absolutely not the truth. Diversity is diversity of ideas and concepts. For example, how do you make a sandwich? Do you first get the 2 pieces of bread out? Do you then butter the 2 pieces of bread? You then go to the fridge, get out your lettuce and your ham and your other things, and you start putting them on the sandwich? Is that how you do it? Do you chop it into a triangle? Do you not chop it at all? Do you chop it into squares? All of these things are like different ways to look at how to make a sandwich. This is diversity in sandwich making. Now, when it comes to video games and ideas such as slavery or very other difficult topics that are being portrayed in this game, you have to look at it from many different aspects, especially the concept of revenge. Now, we look at the concept of revenge in a game such as, I don't know, The Last of Us Part 2, where it is the worst possible revenge story ever made. When we look at Final Fantasy 16, it's a really good revenge story because the main character Clive has a revenge arc where he wants to get revenge on the Icon of Fire, and he slowly realizes that he is the Icon of Fire. Spoilers alert, but I think you can see that from the trailers, and if you're watching this video, you probably have a little bit more knowledge of the game than other people watching this video, so you're going to understand. So he realizes that he is the one that he needs to get revenge against, and he tries to take his own life. And it wasn't for another character, Sid, telling him that there is a bigger plight going on, such as the plight of bearers, and he starts to understand his own role in this world where he can start uplifting other slaves to understand their position and have a better positioning in society, because his fundamental story arc was, I'm fighting for revenge and I'm fighting solely for myself, to becoming a different sort of person where he is fighting for everyone, not just bearers, not just non-bearers, but everyone in this world, including himself, to have a better life. It's not fighting to have a death worth dying for, but fighting for a life worth living. Literally the line that he says in the game. It is really good. But that is only one idea that's played throughout the game when it comes to slavery and revenge. There's another character in the game called Vincent, who is trying to get vengeance on a character that wronged him sorely in the past, and literally builds a community, much like Clive and Sid do, in order to take revenge upon this character. And when they do this, he then has his own revenge arc, and as his revenge arc plays out, it blows up in his face entirely and slightly different from Sid, giving a diverse, different take on how the same story could have played out for Clive. And he gets a very similar happy ending of realizing that there is a different purpose that his life can take, and he instead chooses to follow this passion very wholeheartedly, and it is very good. Next, when we talk about diversity of peoples of colors, people seem to think there are only 2 different types of people in the world. There are white people and there are black people, but that is absolutely not true. Just like there are white people and black people, there is every shade in between. There are Asians, there are Russians, there are Egyptians, there are Iranians, there are Indians. There are so many different types of cultures and peoples out there, and they are represented in Final Fantasy 16. The only culture that isn't represented in Final Fantasy 16 is the African American culture. That's the only one, and that is a very modern culture that wouldn't exist in this prehistoric time. You could say there are black people in the world at the time, and there are black people in this game, but would they have the same sort of role in this world? Especially when you look at the whole continent that this game is on, which is the Twins. There is no Africa continent. There is an Egypt continent, but there is no Africa continent. So, where would these black people come from? They don't exist in this world, unfortunately. They should, but they don't. However, if there were black people in this world and they start putting them into this slavery-driven story that's currently going on throughout this whole game, it would very quickly be criticized for being an obvious profiling of the black struggles that they have had to endure, and would be considered, unfaithful because it is written by a white guy from Japan and translated by a white guy from Europe, and it just wouldn't be faithful to an African American experience that would have had experience in this world and would have a better way to tell their own tale. And they should tell their own tale in their own game with their own diverse set of ideas and concepts and just general diversity. This is real diversity I'm talking about, not just putting a person of color on the front page and saying we're diverse. That's not true diversity. True diversity is diversity of concepts, ideas, and ideals. And that's where Final Fantasy 16 really does shine. And they try their best to do this. There's another really good person of color in this game who is trying to become the mayor of a village in the Egypt area, and he is legitimately a person of color. And he is a bearer, but he has not shown his abilities to anyone because he knows if he shows his abilities as a bearer, everyone would label him as a bearer, and there is very racial and bias against these people who have these abilities. And he shows his ability near the end of the game, and he gets ostracized even though he has done so much good for the community, so much good for this town. But yet, because he is now being seen and revealed as a bearer, he is being asked and forced to leave the town. Unfortunately, this doesn't have the best resolution in the world, because he just fixes another problem with the town like 2 minutes later, and then the town forgives him. But it shows how these characters can have these diverse roles and diverse color based on diverse locations and situations. I believe in this game in particular, it's really focused on the differences that happen between the United Kingdom, which is Scotland, Wales, and England, as well as the small Romanic / Viking continents. So we have the Sweden / Norway sort of groups of people, the Vikings. We also have the Greek / Roman groups of people, and we have the Egyptian people, all in this world. And it's a very proto-Euro game. And it's very important because those are the types of cultures and colors that we see. When we head to the final set of levels in the game, we are in a very much a Welsh sort of environment and continent and people and ideals. And you can see it throughout how they act and what they do and why they are doing the things that they do. And in the beginning of the game, we have a very English sort of continent with Rosaria. And then when we head over, we have a very Scottish continent, and we have a very sort of Viking continent to the left of Rosaria, which are the Iron people. There's a northern continent, which doesn't really get explained too well in the game, but basically they're a civilization that lived in the northern part of the Twins, and the Blight took over their land, and they fled south and had conflict with Rosaria and the Empire and got absolutely demolished. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just saying there is a lot of diversity of locations, ideals, and characters in this game, including skin color. It just doesn't have the African American experience. And that is not a bad thing, because they did not have the writers or the creators who were there to create this African American experience for these African American players. And quite frankly, we need to be able to accept that not all games are going to have every single experience for every single person in the world. Went a little bit long on this one, but that's how you have to do when you are arguing these points. Next. Alright, this is where it gets real hard, because we're not debating really surface level issues, or even not surface level issues, but differences of ideas and opinions to really hard criticisms of the game. And this is coming from Skill Up and Jesse Cox, who both believe that Final Fantasy 16 has left the long-term Final Fantasy players behind, and this is why. And they have some really good points on this. I completely agree with their opinions and their understandings, but I disagree with what they actually said. So in Skill Up, he says one of the major problems he had with the game is that he felt that it has left the turn-based combat roots of Final Fantasy behind. And I'm saying to him that Final Fantasy had left that turn-based roots behind a long time ago, even before Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 7 Remake, where they were clearly moved away from the turn-based combat of the era to a new action-based combat, much like Kingdom Hearts. It has instead changed way back in the day, way back in Final Fantasy 4, when we no longer had turn-based combat. We had the ATB bar, which basically filled up based upon one of the stats the character had, which was speed. So instead of characters taking turns attacking each other, they're constantly attacking each other based on when the AT bar fills. Now you could either play in wait or active mode, and if it was in active mode, people would keep making actions and choices while the when the ATB bar had filled up and you were choosing whether you were going to attack or use a magic or whatever, the enemy will retaliate you, which means you have to make these menu choices fast as possible in order to get the most out of your ATB bar and the speed of your character. So basically, they were always trying to get to the point where it didn't matter whether or not you were playing the game or not. It was about trying to be as close to real time as possible. And now we're at a point where we don't need to see the AT bar filling up. We can just play the game as an action-orientated game like Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy 16, for instance, and then when your AT bar fills up, it's when your skills are available, such as your Rising Phoenix attack, your Giga Beam from whatever else, and it also gives you more options of how the character is played. Now there's one point that Skill Up brought up, which was there is no longer elemental type differences in the game. And I think this is best portrayed in Final Fantasy X, when you have a diverse section of characters who have each their own role for each enemy type. For example, Waka would be really good against air units because he could hit the air units with his ranged weapon. Lulu would be really good against elemental units because you can use elemental attacks that are opposite to the element you're fighting to do extra damage to them. Titus was really good against fast moving enemies like the wolf enemies because he was a fast moving character. And then Auron would be really good against the slow moving enemies that had lots of armor because he had an armor piercing attack. And it was really good showing that you can use certain characters to do certain goals in the game. In Final Fantasy 16, a lot of this stuff is gone, but it is still there because you can use different icon abilities based on the enemy you're fighting. For example, you're fighting a flying enemy, you want to use Garuda and pull that flying enemy down to the ground. If you're versing a heavy enemy that has like a stagger bar, you want to use attacks that would stagger this opponent better and more effectively, such as the stone icon where you can literally counter their attack with a block and then hit them in the face 4 times. And that was really useful. But what the Final Fantasy 16 had to do was make it so that it didn't matter which icon was being used in each combat, it would still have its own personal flair and still be able to deal with each of the creatures and their abilities. For example, to deal with flying enemies, you could charge up your magic attack and hit the flying creature in the air, and it would fall to the ground with a charged up attack. Another problem they came up with was the party members in combat didn't feel like they were a part of your party because you couldn't control them directly. And he said that Final Fantasy VII did this better. And I completely agree that we don't have a lot of control over our party members. The only party member we have any sort of control over is the dog, Torgal, who can heal us, can ravage them, which knocks them into a juggle state, and just sick on them, which means attack them. And it's very limited, I agree, but in a game where we are style switching, which is a term from Devil May Cry, where you would style switch in order to defeat certain enemies, it is basically using your party member and your type choices as your style switches. So for example, like I said before, you want to use Garuda to be a style switch to deal with air enemies. You want to use, I don't know, Bahamut so that you can do some perfectly timed dodges to get this AoE area attack with a bonus, and you know, just like various other things like that. And that would be your party system, which would be your choice of icon. And your party members are just more of a fun bonus because it is very much a selfish game designed to be played by one character doing one thing and one set. I don't know how you really change this because personally I don't like how they did it in Final Fantasy VII Remake, where you just swap character. It's really disorientating and it's not like fun to press buttons in Final Fantasy VII, because that game legitimately comes down to literally 2 buttons and then relying on the ATB bar filling up, which is the same in Final Fantasy 16. It's just you're not disorientating your perspective by moving from one camera angle to the next camera angle as you swap between party members, even though some party members do have difference of attacks, such as Barret is a ranged character, but in the end it just comes down to you're playing as Cloud. You're not really going to be playing as Tifa, you're not really going to be playing as Aerith, you're not going to be playing as Red 13 or anything like that. You're going to focus mostly on the Cloud gameplay, and you're going to leave a lot of the other characters to only use them in specific situations when they can actually be useful. And the biggest problem with Final Fantasy VII Remake is you don't really have control over your party anymore. It just sort of picks, these are your party members for this combat encounter, you're going to deal with it. For example, in Final Fantasy VII Remake, you go through the first part of the game with Aerith, and then you go to the next part of the game, you're going through it with Tifa, and the next part of the game, you're going through it with Barret, and so on and so forth. You don't really have any choice over your party anyway, so who cares, you know? Whereas in Final Fantasy 16, you have always the choice over which form you're using, which character you're using, and how you're fighting the combat encounter. The next thing that Skill Up brings up is that the side quests are not what he believes to be the greatest ever, and he compares them a lot to MMO side quests, and I agree that they look a lot like MMO side quests, especially if you skip the story entirely, which I don't know why you would on your first playthrough, but people do, and they go, oh, these side quests kind of suck. They're just like an MMO side quest where you gotta like collect 3 things and then bring it back to the guy. It kind of sucks. Now we can use like a really good side quest in the game as an example of this, which is where you come across a rich nobleman with a, looks to be a broken down cart or a perfectly functional cart. He's just by a cart. And he says, "My son is being attacked, bearer. You must save my son from the dog." And on the surface, this, if you skip all the dialogue, is just, go to this place and kill this dog. You go to the place, you kill the dog, you return, the quest is over, done. Now that seems like a pretty boring quest, right? But if you actually listen to what's actually happening, is he first mistakes you as a bearer that he bought and purchased to go and save his son, but realistically his son wasn't in trouble at all, and once you save the sun chastises you for saying, "How dare you kill my dog? You were meant to die to my dog bearer. You're not doing this right. You should have died." And he runs back to his dad, and then you go back to his dad, and his dad chastises you and says, "How dare you kill my son's dog bearer? You were meant to die. You weren't the bearer I hired." And you find out that they literally buy people in order to use them as toys and as entertainment, like in a battle coliseum arena, except for in a very small scale, because, you know, we're not going to do a coliseum sort of side quest here. We're just going to show what this is sort of like on a really small scale. And then, you know, he goes, "Well, we're going to hire a new dog, and we're going to get more bearers, and we're going to kill them the same way. What are you going to do about it, bitch?" I'm like, "Oh, I guess we're not going to do nothing, really, because we don't really want to kick up a bunch of dirt in this foreign land just to deal with this prick, you know? We're just going to, like, move on. So be it." So we go back and we bury the bearers, and we meet another bearer, or I'm not sure if he is a bearer or not, but he's part of our cause, and he goes, "Yeah, these guys are real dicks. We know about it, but, you know, they may get their just comeuppance if they keep hiring these wild dogs, because, well, they are wild hounds, and these things will turn on their masters." And then we head back to where the master was, and guess what? They died. They got another wild dog, and it killed both of them. Now, on the surface, this quest is really easy and simple. You kill one dog. That's it. Your quest is done. But when you actually pay attention to what's actually happening in this subquest, it's really deep, really ingrained, and has a lot of story going on with it. And that's with all of the side quests in Final Fantasy XVI. There isn't a single Final Fantasy XVI subquest that isn't wasted, except for one that I can think of, which is the subquest about making a knife. And it was more of an allegory about how to serve customers. And I think it's actually a pretty good allegory when you compare it to all of these reviews that have happened. So basically, in this subquest, we are tasked with asking people how to make the best possible knife. And so we go to the hunter, and the hunter says it needs to be durable, because I don't want to be out in the field skinning a cat and then it freaking dies. I mean, it breaks on me, and how can I skin this cat? I have to go all the way back to town with the whole thing instead of just with the hide. You know, it's just, I need to be a durable knife. And we go to the chef, and the chef goes, "It needs to be the sharpest knife possible, because I need it to chop this stuff really fine and really well, and needs to be perfect for this hardy sinew." And then we go to some other person, they go, "Well, it needs to look really fucking pretty, because, you know, I'm going to display it to my guests when they come in." And I go, "Oh, that's a fucking knife there," you know? So we do all this, and then we go, "Well, how do we make this knife?" "Well, I don't know how to make it sharp and hardy and fancy looking, and also fit the theme that is this town." And so we make this knife, and it's really expensive, and no one would actually use this knife because it's too expensive, and only a nobleman would actually have any value in it, but even they wouldn't need the extra features of it being really hardy and really sharp at the same time. And we then show it to the forge master, and the forge master goes, "Yeah, you made a good knife, but how would you price this knife?" And we go, "Oh, it'd be a couple of million gil, you know, like we put a lot of time and effort. These items aren't easy to come by, the sharpness isn't hard to hone, this durability is like really hard to get." And he's like, "You're entirely right to price it at that point, but why would a chef buy it at this price point? Why would a hunter buy it at this price point? And why would a nobleman buy it at this price point?" And we go, "Oh, well, what would you do?" And we go, "Well, I would make different knives based on the person that I was selling to. If it was a chef, I would make it a really sharp knife that would be sharp enough for them to do what they need to do with, and keep it at a low price and have no other benefits to it. If it was the hunter, I'd make it a really durable knife. It wouldn't be the sharpest knife in the world, but it would be durable, and it would remain at a low price. And if it was a nobleman who wanted to buy my knife, well, I would make it the most expensive knife I could possibly make. And it shows because when the creators made Final Fantasy 16, they had a goal in mind when they were making this game. And they wanted to make a game where they could tell the best story they possibly could, have the best graphics they possibly could, and have a fun and engaging gameplay that was enough to satisfy the customer. And as the customer, I think they did a fantastic job. And I'm sure a lot of you guys agree, because it's sitting at a 9.5 on Metacritic. And there have been people that have been, trying to review bomb it with zeros, review bomb it with 10s, but, overall, it's a very good game. I have very little criticisms of the games, and SkillUp does a really good job of showing those criticisms off, and I believe that he's a little bit misplaced with some of those criticisms because he is believing this game to be a game that it isn't at all. He is thinking that it is Final Fantasy 1 again, which it isn't. It's not a turn-based game, and expecting Final Fantasy to stay a turn-based game is kinda stupid, because they were always heading down this path, even way back in Final Fantasy 4 when they introduced the ATB bar, where you have to take your turns as fast as possible because they want this game to be as immediately engaging as possible, and a turn-based RPG isn't immediately engaging. We can still have those turn-based games, and Final Fantasy still makes those turn-based games. Well, Square Enix still makes those turn-based games, I should say, because they have made Triangle series, and it's really good. They've remade Ogre Reborn, they've done lots of things. They have that new mobile game which is all turn-based. They even have just turn-based RPGs in general with Octopath Traveler, which is by Triangle Reborn, stuff like that. So it's not as if Square Enix has lost their turn-based past. They just believe that Final Fantasy, which is their tentpole franchise, should be a modern game with modern features and modern ideals and modern characters and modern storylines, modern, everything. And they have done that in Final Fantasy 16. This game is a contemporary game that is for the contemporary audience that it is serving, and it has done a fantastic job. I really enjoyed this game, so much so that immediately after beating the game, I didn't even consider not playing New Game Plus straight away. I jumped straight into it because it was such an engaging game. And I have been skipping content or the story on New Game Plus, and I can see the problems that these reviewers and these people are having with thinking that these side quests and this plot and the people of colors just don't exist in the game, and that there's no diversity whatsoever, and it's just a really basic brawler. I see all that when you skip every single cutscene, every single story element, and it is just, I understand, I get what you're saying, but when you look at the picture as a whole, this game does a fantastic job at what it's trying to do. This has been Kris. This has been the Final Fantasy 16 Hot Takes. Hope you guys enjoyed. Give it a like, give it a subscribe. I will see you guys with a massive Final Fantasy 16 review where I'll be talking about every single side quest, every single main story moment, every single character, every single weapon, every single idea in this game in a massive review that's going to be way too long. Expect it in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.